Hi everyone, this is Shivali from 1301 and welcome to Python Basics. So today we're going to go over things like data types, functions, parameters, and return statements. The first thing we want to do is open up idle. And you'll notice when you open up idle at the top it says shell. So the Python shell is just a place where you can type in quick statements like maybe 5 plus 5 and get an answer back really quick, but if you want to type multiple lines of code and you also want to save it for later, you should open up a script, and the way you do that is just going to File, New File, and it opens something that's just a blank page, looks kind of like a Word document, and that's where you can type in multiple lines. So I'm just going to save it, and let's start with different data types. So the first data type that we have is an integer. So an integer is just any whole number. And so it could be something like 0, we could have 9, we could have a negative number, -5, just any whole number. It's the same as it is in math. And then the next thing we have is a float. So it's a number with a decimal point. So that could be something like 9.9. You can have a negative number, negative 0.03. Even a number like 8.0, which is a whole number, is still considered a float because it has a decimal point in it. And then the next data type we have is a string. So a string is just a sequence of characters enclosed in quotes. So you can use single quotes. So that would be something like apple, and there's just single quotes around it. You can use double quotes, and you could have the same word. Or you could use triple quotes, which are just 3 single quotes, and that allows you to have a string that spans multiple lines. And a string can also have numbers or decimal points in it. So I could have a string of 3.0, or you could have a string of negative 0.9999. And these are all valid strings. They're not floats or integers. The next data type we have are Booleans. And you'll learn a lot more about Booleans later. For now, the important thing to know is that they can have 2 values. So they could have true or they could have false. It's important that the T and the F be capitalized in the true or false. And then the next data type we have is none type. It is spelled exactly like that, and the N and the T are capitalized. And none type only has one value that it takes on, and it's none. And the N has to be capitalized there. And you'll learn more about Boolean and none types later. For now, just know which values they can have. So now that we looked at all of the data types, we can look at how can we store these data types. And the way we store that is by using variables. They also work pretty much the same way as you do in math. So you can have variable names that start with a lowercase letter and uppercase letter, so any letter or an underscore. So you could have A, and you can assign it to any value. Here I've assigned it to the value 5. And this thing that looks like an equal symbol, we call it an assignment token because it means that we're assigning a value to a variable name. And then I could also have a variable name start with an underscore, so I could have underscore A equals true. But then maybe later on I want to change the value of underscore A. I could change it to anything. It doesn't have to be the same data type. So I could give it the value of yes. So we can just do some quick things in the shell. So if I say A equals 10, and then I type in A, Python gives me back 10 since it's showing me the value of A. But if I now have A equals true, and I type in A, it shows me true and not the 10 since I changed the value of A. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how do we organize our code in Python. So we organize them in things called functions, and those are just blocks of code that are executed together. And the way we write function is that we have a function header, and all functions start out the same way. They all have this def word, def, which stands for define, which means you're defining a function, and then you just have the function name, and then you have parentheses, and inside these parentheses you can have something called parameters, which we'll talk more about later. And then once you have your function header, then you write your lines of code under the function header, and you have to make sure they're all indented. So you have line 1, then line 2, line 3, etc. So you can have as many lines of code as you want in a function. Suppose I had line 4 written down here. Line 4 is not a part of the function because it is not indented. So if I wanted it to be part of the function, I would have to indent it like that. So now we can write an example function, and we can write a function that maybe adds two numbers together. So we always start out with the def keyword and then the function name. So I'm just going to call it addition. And then the parameters go in the parentheses. So parameters are just values that your function takes in, and then you can use those values later. You can have multiple parameters, or you can just have one parameter. So in this case, we're going to add two numbers together. So we have two parameters, and you don't have to call them x and y. You can call them literally anything else. And then in my function, I just wanted to add x and y together and then print it out. So I could just say print x plus y, and make sure that whatever you're printing, it's inside parentheses. So I can run the script that I wrote just by going to run at the top and then run module. Notice how nothing shows up here. So Python basically, when I ran the script, it looked at all this, it said yes, there's code, and all of the syntax for the code is correct. But if I actually want to run the function addition, I have to type in the function name, and then I need to give it two parameter values. So I can give any two numbers, 3 and 10, and it prints out 13. So it said, okay, you're calling the function addition with 3 and 10. So it looks at addition, and what addition is doing is just printing out the two numbers added together, and then it does that for me. So I could have had a function that takes in just one parameter, and your function doesn't have to print out anything. I could just add the parameter to some arbitrary number, and then nothing actually happens since we didn't print out anything. So print is actually its own function in Python. And all functions return something. So if you don't explicitly specify what a function returns, they return none. Explicitly return something / a value, return none. So print is actually a function that returns none. So print is a function that returns none. So how can we have functions that actually return something? So returning something just means that your function gives you back a value that you can then use for later. So we can rewrite the addition function. We call it addition2. And it will also take in two numbers, but this time we're going to return x plus y instead of printing it. And when we run it, I'm just going to make the shell a little bigger. And we call addition2 on 3 and 10. It gives us back 13. But what you can also do is save this under variable. So I can say a equals the result of whatever the addition2 function gives me when I put in 3 and 10. So now when I look at a now has the value of 13. So it did addition2 with 3 and 10, and it gave back 13 because the function returned something. Then we were able to store that returned value under the variable a. Now if I do the same thing but with just the addition function, and then I look at what the value of b is, b actually doesn't have a value. So I can check the type of b, so that's how you check the data type of a variable, or any values, just you do type and then parentheses you put in the variable, and it's of none type because the addition function, it just printed something. It didn't actually return anything explicitly, which means that it just returned none. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind in Python, is that print returns none. And it's always really useful to have your functions return something, because then that data can be used for later. So I hope this video was super helpful to you, and I'll see you next time.